The rain fell in sheets, drumming relentlessly against the windows of the Jensen family home in a quiet Ohio suburb. Inside, the lights were dim, casting long shadows across the living room. Sarah Jensen paced back and forth, glancing every few seconds at the clock. It was nearly midnight, and Daisy, her golden retriever, had been restless for hours. Her whines, soft at first, had grown into anxious, guttural cries, each one piercing Sarah's heart. Sarah knelt beside Daisy, brushing back wet strands of fur from her eyes. "You're okay, girl. You can do this," she murmured, trying to calm not just Daisy, but herself. She had raised Daisy since she was a tiny puppy, and the bond they shared was unbreakable. But something about this night felt different. Daisy's labor was longer than expected. Each contraction seemed to shake the room itself. Sarah held Daisy's paw as the first puppy slid into the world, slick and tiny, its cries muffled by exhaustion. Relief washed over her for a brief moment, but there was no time to relax. The second, third, and fourth followed quickly, and then came the fifth, then the sixth. Sarah's jaw dropped as she continued counting 15. 15 little lives, 15 puppies born in the middle of a stormy night. Her arms ached as she carefully wrapped them in towels and placed them in a warm box near the fireplace. Her heart swelled with joy. 15, she whispered to herself. That's incredible. But as she leaned closer, a strange chill ran down her spine. The smallest of the puppies, its skin faintly translucent under the light of the fire, blinked at her with eyes that were too large, too aware. The shape of their tiny limbs didn't quite match what Sarah had seen in puppies before. She shook her head, thinking exhaustion must be playing tricks on her. Daisy whimpered, nuzzling Sarah's shoulder as if she sensed her unease. Sarah hugged her tightly. "It's okay, girl. They're fine." But deep down, an unsettling thought lingered. Something about these puppies wasn't right. By dawn, Sarah's exhaustion was total, but her worry had only grown. She gently carried Daisy and the brood to her car, wrapping them in blankets as the storm began to ease. The streets glistened with rain, and a pale morning sun peeked through the clouds, casting a silvery glow over the neighborhood. Neighbors would have been watching if anyone had been awake, but the street was empty, silent, almost quiet. At the vet's office, Dr. Marcus Levin, a man whose calm demeanor usually comforted her, greeted her with surprise. 15, that's extraordinary, he said, eyes wide as Sarah set the box on the counter. He crouched to inspect each tiny creature, lifting them carefully, one by one. "HMM," he murmured, frowning. He tapped on their tiny chests, listened to their tiny hearts, studied the delicate features of their faces. And then he paused. He picked up the smallest one, squinting, adjusting his glasses. "Wait, this isn't quite right," he muttered. Sarah's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. Dr. Levin shook his head slowly, as though he couldn't believe his own eyes. It's hard to explain. These aren't like any puppies I've ever seen. Their eyes, their skin, their features are unusual, almost unnatural." Sarah's pulse spiked. "Unnatural? What do you mean?" Before Dr. Levin could answer, his phone vibrated insistently. He glanced at the screen, and his face drained of color. He put the phone down slowly, his hands trembling. "Sarah, I think we might need some specialist help," he said, voice tight, almost afraid. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shimmering. The sky was a pale gray, heavy with unched clouds. Sarah clutched Daisy's fur, feeling a cold sweat on her back. She glanced down at the 15 tiny creatures, all nestled in their towels. Something about their eyes, the way they twitched and moved, made her heart pound. I don't understand," she whispered. Dr. Levin shook his head, hesitant, as if the words themselves were dangerous. "I've seen a lot in my 30 years, Sarah, but I've never seen anything like this. I don't know what they are." Not entirely. For a moment, the world outside seemed to hold its breath. The sound of a distant car passing, the flutter of leaves against the window, it all faded. Sarah's hands were shaking, her mind racing. 15 puppies or something that looked like puppies lay before her, and already she knew that nothing about her life would ever be the same. And then, one of the tiniest creatures opened its eyes and looked directly at her, holding her gaze with an intensity that made her shiver. Something about that stare made Sarah feel as if the room itself had shifted. The ordinary world she knew, the streets, the neighborhood, her quiet life suddenly felt fragile. The truth was coming. as she didn't know if she was ready. The morning light seeped through the blinds of the vet clinic, yet it offered no comfort to Sarah. She could barely hold Daisy steady as the golden retriever sniffed nervously at the sterile walls. The storm from the night before had left puddles across the parking lot, reflecting the gray sky like shards of broken glass. Inside, Dr. Marcus Levitt stood waiting, rubbing his temples, his usual calm replaced by a rare unease. "Have you noticed anything unusual?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking, as she placed the box of puppies gently on the counter. Daisy leaned against her leg, her eyes darting nervously round the room. Dr. Levin bent over, examining the first of the tiny creatures. He picked it up delicately, weighing it in his hands. "They're small, yes, but healthy," he said, forcing reassurance into his voice. Then, he paused mid-sentence, tilting his head. "Their limbs, their eyes, something isn't right." Sarah frowned, confusion and fear mingling in her chest. "Not right? They're puppies, aren't they?" Dr. Levin shook his head slowly. "I've seen a lot in my 30 years, Sarah, but I've never seen anything like this. Look at the way their skin is. See the translucence here? And their eyes, they react differently, almost aware." He swallowed hard, as if trying to convince himself it was nothing. One of the smaller creatures squirmed, and its tiny claws flexed in a way that made Sarah flinch. It looked directly at her, and she felt a shiver travel down her spine. There was intelligence there, something human-like, and it unnerved her more than she wanted to admit. Dr. Levin called a specialist from the University of Geneticists who worked with exotic species and rare anomalies. "If anyone can make sense of this, it's Dr. Helen Strauss," he explained, his voice tight. Sarah nodded, though a pit of unease settled in her stomach. Hours passed in tense anticipation. The bright fluorescent lights of the clinic reflected off shiny tile floors. Dr. Strauss examined each tiny creature meticulously, running tests, checking vitals, and collecting DNA samples. Sarah sat quietly, her fingers laced tightly together, Daisy's head resting in her lap. The room was filled with the faint smell of antiseptic, the occasional squeak of a tiny paw, and the low hum of machines, every sound magnified by the suspense hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Dr. Strauss leaned back, her face pale and tight. "These are not puppies," she said slowly, choosing her words with care. "Biologically, they do not match any canine DNA we've cataloged, nor do they match any mammal in our records." Sarah's heart stopped. "Not puppies? Then what are they?" The geneticist shook her head. "We don't know. They're developing at an accelerated rate much faster than a normal mammal. Their cells regenerate unusually quickly, and there are other anomalies. Their neural activity is extraordinary, almost hyper-intelligent." Sarah's mind reeled. Hyper-intelligent? But they're babies. "They're more than that," Dr. Strauss said quietly, leaning closer. "If I'm correct, and I think I am, these creatures are unlike anything we've ever seen. They are evolving before our eyes." Sarah's chest tightened, a mix of awe and terror constricting her lungs. She glanced down at the tiny creatures in the box. One of them looked up at her with those wide, unblinking eyes. It tilted its head, and she swore she could feel it studying her. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. Dr. Levin picked it up reluctantly, reading a message that made his expression go from concern to outright fear. He looked at Sarah, voice almost a whisper. "Sarah, you need to listen carefully. This isn't just unusual. This could attract attention, powerful attention." "What do you mean?" she asked, panic creeping in. "The government, private labs, anyone with knowledge of anomalies like this would be very interested. And they might not be gentle," Dr. Levin said, his eyes darkening. He paused, glancing at the tiny creatures, now crawling over the soft towels. "You need to keep them safe. Keep them hidden. Understand?" Sarah nodded, though every instinct screamed fear. She wrapped her arms around Daisy and the box, feeling the creature squirm against her chest. The first of the 15 creatures blinked up at her, its eyes reflecting the fluorescent lights like tiny mirrors. It was almost as if it recognized her anxiety, its awareness far beyond that of a normal animal. Sarah's stomach churned. What had she brought into her home? Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting streaks of light across the parking lot. But for Sarah, the warmth of daylight offered no comfort. Something about those eyes, so small yet so knowing, made her feel like the rules of reality had shifted. And then, a faint sound from the street made her freeze, a low, mechanical hum, distant but deliberate. Sarah's blood ran cold. It was almost imperceptible, yet it was there, persistent. Someone, or something, was coming. Her grip on the box tightened. Daisy growled softly, low in her throat, sensing the change in atmosphere. Sarah felt it too. The sensation that their lives had just been thrown into an unimaginable story, one that might be far bigger, far darker, than she could ever understand. The creatures twitched and turned their heads, reacting to the sound with alarming synchronicity. It was as if they already knew what was coming before she did. Sarah swallowed hard. "Daisy, we're not safe," she whispered, and in that instant, a cold shiver ran down her spine. The world outside the clinic, ordinary just moments ago, had shifted. Someone or something was aware of them. Something extraordinary had begun. The lab was quiet except for the faint hum of machines and the occasional squeak of the tiny creatures as they explored the corners of their temporary enclosure. Sarah sat on a hard metal chair, her fingers knotted together. Daisy curled protectively at her feet. She had followed Dr. Levin and Dr. Strauss to the State University lab, a sterile, imposing building on the edge of town, because they insisted the creatures, her puppies, needed proper analysis. But as hours stretched into the evening, the sterile hum of fluorescent lights did little to calm her spiraling thoughts. Dr. Strauss moved around the creatures with precision, her gloves and instruments ensuring she maintained strict control. "We need to understand their physiology," she explained, her tone clipped with urgency. "They're developing at an unprecedented rate. Every hour, they're changing." Sarah leaned forward. "Changing? What do you mean?" "They're maturing faster than any mammal we've studied," Dr. Strauss said, her brow furrowing. "And their neural development, extraordinary. Look at these e-greetings, they're nearly at the level of human infants, maybe higher. Their brain waves are unusual, almost hyper-aware." Sarah's eyes widened. Her throat tightened. "So, they're not puppies?" Dr. Levin shook his head. "No, Sarah, there's something else. And I'm not exaggerating when I say we have no precedent for this. No data, no research. This is new territory." One of the creatures, the smallest of the 15, tilted its head at Sarah as if it understood her question. Its translucent skin seemed to shimmer slightly under the harsh lab lights. Its tiny, delicate fingers flexed in ways a newborn puppy never could. "They're watching us," Sarah whispered. "They are," Dr. Strauss confirmed, her voice barely above a murmur. "And it's intentional. Their awareness is unlike any animal I've studied. They respond to observation. They adapt." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. She bent closer, touching the tiny creature gently, and for a moment, it looked directly into her eyes. She had never felt a connection like this before. A sudden, almost telepathic understanding seemed to pass between them. A silent communication she couldn't fully explain. And then Dr. Strauss broke the silence. "We ran DNA tests," she said, her tone tight. "The results, they're not canine, nor any known mammal. They have DNA, yes, but it's unusual, mutated, but stable. And there's something else." She paused, glancing at Dr. Levin, who nodded grimly. "They aren't from this environment alone," Dr. Levin said quietly. "There's a pattern in their genes. Something foreign. Something possibly extraterrestrial." Sarah froze. Her stomach churned. "Extraterrestrial? You mean aliens?" Dr. Strauss leaned back, her face pale. "I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I cannot explain them scientifically. Their growth rate, their intelligence, their physiology, it defies everything we know. They are alive. They are aware. But they are not of this world, at least not entirely." Daisy whimpered softly, resting her head on Sarah's lap, and the creature stirred, almost in response. Sarah's heart hammered. 15 creatures, once thought to be puppies, were now a living enigma, staring at her with uncanny intelligence. She felt an icy fear settle in her chest. This was bigger than anything she could have imagined. And then the largest of the creatures, the one that had been unusually active since birth, suddenly let out a sharp, high-pitched squeal, a sound that was more awareness than noise. It bolted across the enclosure with surprising speed, moving with coordination far beyond any newborn mammal. The others followed in perfect synchronicity, forming a tight cluster in the corner, their iridescent eyes reflecting the lab's harsh light. Sarah gasped. "What are they doing?" Dr. Strauss looked at her, her voice tense. I don't know. They're communicating, somehow, with each other and possibly with you." Suddenly, the creatures stopped. All 15 turned their eyes toward the entrance of the lab, heads tilting, bodies tense. Sarah felt the cold sweat on her forehead. She followed their gaze, and her heart skipped a beat. Through the glass doors of the lab, she saw a figure, a tall silhouette, moving slowly and deliberately. It carried a briefcase and walked with purpose. There was something about the figure that made the hair on the back of her neck rise. Dr. Levin's hand rested on her shoulder. Sarah, whoever that is, they know. They know about these creatures, and they're coming here for them. Sarah's fingers tightened around Daisy's fur. She swallowed hard, fear and protectiveness warring inside her. 15 creatures, innocent yet powerful, were staring at a doorway, aware of danger before she even saw it. And now she understood something chilling. Their lives and maybe hers were in immediate jeopardy. The lights in the lab flickered, and a strained hum filled the air, almost imperceptible, vibrating through the walls. The creatures stiffened, moving as one. Sarah's breath caught. What do we do? Dr. Strauss shook her head, voice low, almost a whisper. We prepare, and we hope we're not too late. The figure outside paused, reaching into their coat. The lab's automatic doors began to hiss open, and in that moment, Sarah realized the world she knew, the quiet streets, her safe home. Daisy, curled by her side, had vanished. Everything was about to change. The door clicked, and then it opened. The automatic doors of the lab slid open with a hiss, and a shadowy figure stepped into the bright fluorescent lights. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as she instinctively drew Daisy closer. The silhouette was tall, imposing, and moved with precise, calculated steps. Every instinct Sarah had screamed, this person was not here to help. Dr. Levin stepped forward cautiously. Who are you? What do you want? His voice, usually so commanding, trembled slightly. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it reached into the coat, revealing a sleek, black tablet. Its screen glowed softly, illuminating a face that Sarah couldn't see clearly, hidden in shadow. I'm here on behalf of interests that need these specimens, the voice said, calm but cold. Step aside, please. The creatures belong to us. Sarah's stomach turned. No, they don't belong to anyone. They're alive. They're family. The creatures, now fully aware of the intruder, reacted instantly. The largest of the 15 raised its tiny, iridescent eyes, and for the first time, Sarah saw it move deliberately toward the edge of the enclosure. Its limbs were stronger than any newborn should be, and it seemed to communicate silently with the others. Suddenly, the room vibrated with a low hum. The smallest creature's skin glowed faintly, a soft phosphorescence that made Sarah flinch. The intruder's calm demeanor faltered slightly, eyes narrowing at the strange display. Dr. Strauss whispered urgently, They're responding. Somehow they're aware of you. They know you're a threat. Sarah felt Daisy stiffen, hackles raised, growling softly. They're protecting themselves. Or us, she said, awe and fear mixing in her voice. She couldn't look away from the creatures, now fully alert. Their collective intelligence astonishing. The figure raised the tablet, swiping across the screen. Lights flashed in response, and Sarah's stomach dropped. Weapons? She murmured. No. Dr. Levin said quietly. Some kind of scanning device. Trying to analyze them, the largest creature's glow intensified, and the room seemed to shiver. Papers rustled, instruments rattled, and a strange vibration filled the lab. Sarah felt the hairs on her arms stand on end. There, fighting back, she breathed. The intruder took a cautious step back, eyes flicking nervously between the creatures and the humans. Sarah saw a fleeting expression, a flash of fear. And then, the creatures did something impossible. In unison, they moved toward the edge of their enclosure, their tiny bodies coordinated, intelligent. The air around them seemed charged, alive. Sarah instinctively put her hand over Daisy's eyes as a sudden shockwave rattled the room. Machines beeped frantically, alarms blaring. The intruder stumbled, dropping the tablet, which shattered across the floor. Sarah gasped. Her knees buckled as the realization hit her. These creatures weren't just aware they were powerful. And this power, whatever it was only beginning to manifest. Dr. Strauss muttered under her breath, They're accelerating. Faster than we thought. This growth, this intelligence, it's exponential. Outside, the faint hum Sarah had noticed earlier became louder, more insistent. It was not a sound, exactly, but a vibration she could feel in her chest. The creature's glow intensified further, casting long, eerie shadows against the lab walls. It wasn't just light, it was presence. Sarah clutched Daisy tightly. They can sense danger before it even arrives, she whispered. She glanced at the creatures, feeling both awe and terror. They had once been puppies, innocent, helpless. Now they were something else entirely, something beyond human understanding. The intruder had regained some composure, raising their hands in a futile gesture of control. But the creatures, 15 tiny forms now pulsing with an almost supernatural light, moved as one. The air thickened, and Sarah felt an almost magnetic pull emanating from them. The intruder froze, eyes wide, a pale reflection of fear. And then, as suddenly as it began, the glow dimmed. The room fell eerily quiet, machines eerily calm, and the intruder backed toward the exit, glancing over their shoulder. "This isn't over," the voice warned. "You can't hide them forever." Sarah felt a cold sweat run down her spine. Her chest heaved as she held Daisy, eyes locked on the creatures. They had saved her, for now. But the threat had only escalated. Whoever or whatever was coming next wouldn't be deterred so easily. Dr. Levin's voice was low. "Grave. Sarah, you need to understand. These creatures, they're growing, evolving, and they're aware. They're not just something to study or protect. They're something else entirely. Something the world may not be ready for." Sarah swallowed hard, heart pounding. She looked at the 15 glowing, intelligent beings. The tiny miracles she had once thought were puppies. Fear, awe, and love tangled inside her. Outside, the lab windows rattled. A dark SUV rolled slowly to the curb, headlights slicing through the forest shadows. Sarah's stomach sank. They were being hunted. Daisy growled, low and menacing, as the creatures clustered together, their glow intensifying once more. Sarah knew then this was no ordinary threat. They would have to fight, hide, or flee. As she realized, with chilling clarity, that their lives and possibly her own were about to change forever. The SUV's engine cut. Silence fell. The shadows outside moved. Sarah's breath caught. She knew, without a doubt, the real danger had just begun. By the following morning, Sarah felt like she hadn't slept in days. The adrenaline of the previous night's confrontation still pulsed through her veins, making her palms sweat and her heart hammer uncontrollably. Daisy sat at her side, alert, her ears twitching at the faintest sounds. The 15 creatures, no longer just tiny puppies, had grown noticeably overnight. Their eyes now glimmered with intelligence, tracking Sarah's movements, following her every gesture, almost as if they understood her inner thoughts. Sarah knew they couldn't stay in the lab. The intruder had warned her they weren't safe. And now, with a leak of information on the internet, she realized her worst fear was coming true. A video someone had taken at the university lab had surfaced online. 15 glowing, unusual creatures huddled in blankets. A puppy-turned alien anomaly that had already begun sparking the imagination of millions. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #AlienPuppies, #OhioMystery, and #SuperDogs were trending nationally within hours. Sarah Jensen, her phone buzzed incessantly. "We need to speak with you." Every news outlet, every social media influencer, every conspiracy theory blog seemed to know her name. She could feel the walls closing in. Dr. Levin leaned over her shoulder, examining the videos circulating online. His expression was grim. "It's not just curiosity. People will come. The government, labs, private interests. They'll want them. They'll want all of them. And they might not care about ethics." Sarah swallowed hard, glancing down at Daisy and the creatures. The 15 beings, once her quiet, sleepy puppies, were now alert, moving with coordination and speed she couldn't fully comprehend. The largest among them, which Sarah had started calling Orion, crawled to the edge of the enclosure and stared at her with piercing, glowing eyes. It was almost as if it knew the danger they were in. "They're aware of the leak," Dr. Strauss murmured. "They can sense attention, threat, focus. Their responses are instantaneous. You might think you're hiding them, but they know." Sarah felt her chest tighten. Every muscle in her body was tense, every instinct screaming that they needed to leave. She had no idea where to go or who to trust, but the creatures themselves seemed to understand, communicating silently through movements and glances. Even Daisy, usually gentle and calm, growled low in her throat, raised, her eyes darting to the front window. And then she saw it, headlights glinting off the wet asphalt of the road outside. Not one car but two, black SUVs. Their engines idled like predators in the dark, waiting. "They're here," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. Dr. Levin grabbed her arm. "We need to move them, now. Pack everything. Hide them somewhere they can't find. They're fast, but they're not invincible if cornered." Sarah nodded, panic surging as she wrapped the creatures in blankets. each tiny form pulsating faintly with their strange glow. Daisy moved alongside her, protective, almost guiding, as if sensing the exact route they should take. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rustling the trees and carrying the faint sound of tires crunching gravel. They loaded the creatures into the back of Dr. Levin's van, careful to keep them hidden. Sarah's hands trembled as she adjusted the blankets, whispering to them softly, "It's going to be okay. We'll find somewhere safe." But the creatures seemed impatient. Their eyes glimmered, scanning the van, testing every corner. Orion, the largest, emitted a low, almost musical hum, vibrating the air around them. Sarah shivered. She had never heard anything like it, and yet she felt comforted, as if the sound was a promise. "We will survive this." As they drove through winding country roads, the SUVs appeared in their rearview mirror, headlights slicing through the early morning mist. Sarah's stomach dropped. Whoever was behind the leak was relentless. They weren't just curious, they were organized, methodical, dangerous. At one particularly sharp turn, the creatures stirred. Their small, almost alien bodies moved in unison, subtly shifting the van's weight. Sarah blinked. The van swerved slightly, as if the creatures themselves were guiding it, helping her navigate the treacherous road. She gasped, awe and fear intertwining. They're helping us," she whispered. Dr. Levin nodded slowly, eyes wide. "Yes, but we're not out of danger. Whoever is behind this, they won't give up easily, and they will be watching every move we make." Then, in the distance, she saw a figure step onto the road, dark, sudden, and unnervingly still. A silhouette against the fog. The SUV slowed, their drivers alert. The figure raised something too small to see clearly, but the movement was deliberate, almost a signal. The creatures stiffened, their glow intensifying. Sarah's throat tightened as she realized the figure wasn't just an observer. They were ready to intercept. Her grip on the wheel tightened. "We can't stop. Not now. Not ever." Daisy growled low in her throat. The creatures hummed in unison, and the forest around them seemed to hold its breath. Sarah knew the journey ahead would be more dangerous than anything she had ever imagined. And she also knew, with a sinking certainty, that the world beyond the trees was already closing in. The road stretched ahead, dark and twisting. Behind them, shadows moved with intent. And in that moment, Sarah understood something terrifying. They were no longer running from curiosity. They were running from the world itself. The winding country roads blurred past as Sarah gripped the steering wheel. With white-knuckled intensity, her pulse pounded in her ears, matching the rhythmic hum of the van's engine and the low growl of the stormy wind. Daisy, tense and alert, pressed against her leg, while the 15 creatures huddled beneath blankets in the back, their faint glow pulsing like living beacons. Sarah had stopped thinking of them as puppies hours ago. They were something entirely different, something she barely understood but instinctively knew she had to protect. Behind them, the black SUVs cut through the mist, moving with unnerving precision. Every turn Sarah made, the vehicles mirrored, always staying dangerously close. She could almost feel the eyes behind the tinted windows, cold and calculating, measuring every move. Whoever or whatever was chasing them was prepared. "They know exactly where we are," Dr. Levin muttered from the passenger seat, his voice low. "Strained. They've studied these roads. They're anticipating our moves." Sarah's hands tightened around the wheel. "Then we have to be unpredictable." She swerved sharply at the next fork, tires squealing against the wet asphalt. In the back, the creatures stirred. Sarah glanced briefly, startled. Their tiny forms shifted in unison, almost as if they were aware of the road, reading the twists and curves faster than any human could. She gasped. "They're helping me drive?" she whispered, disbelief evident in her voice. Dr. Levin nodded slowly, his eyes wide. "It's possible. Whatever these creatures are, they're not only intelligent, they're coordinated. They think strategically in ways humans don't even understand." For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to marvel, even as fear gripped her heart. These beings, once her innocent puppies, were guiding her through the forest, anticipating danger, encountering threats almost instinctively. Their glow brightened slightly at each sharp turn, illuminating the van's interior in a surreal, almost ethereal light. But the chase was relentless. The SUVs stayed on their trail, engines rumbling, tires kicking up water and debris. Ahead, a narrow bridge loomed, flanked by dense trees. Sarah's stomach twisted. One wrong move and they could crash or be trapped. She slowed slightly, feeling the creatures tense. Orion, the largest, pressed against the blanket and emitted a low, vibrating hum. Sarah felt it resonate in her chest, almost a warning. The first SUV veered ahead, blocking one path. The second positioned itself to cut off another escape route. Sarah's mind raced. They were cornered, but the creatures were calm, their coordination perfect. It was as if they could see solutions she couldn't. They know exactly what to do, she whispered. There, controlling the situation. Daisy growled low in her throat, ears pinned, eyes fixed on the farthest shadows where the SUV's headlights glimmered. Sarah's throat tightened. She could feel tension radiating from every being in the van, the creatures, Daisy, Dr. Levin, and from herself. Every nerve screamed danger. And then, as if on cue, the creatures acted. One by one, they moved under the blankets, emitting a soft, synchronized glow that filled the van. The vibration in the air increased, subtle but undeniable. Sarah felt her hands grip the wheel tighter, her breath catching. The van seemed to respond, almost nudged by the creature's combined energy. The SUVs faltered. One skidded slightly on the wet asphalt, tires squealing. The other slowed instinctively, almost as if sensing the anomaly ahead. Sarah's heart raced. The creatures weren't just defending, they were manipulating reality in ways she couldn't comprehend. She pressed the accelerator, taking the bridge at full speed. Trees blurred past, mist curling around the tires, the van swaying dangerously. Behind them, the SUV struggled to keep up. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself a fleeting surge of hope. They could escape, but then she saw it, a third vehicle, silent until now, emerging from the forest like a predator stalking its prey. Its engine hummed low, almost mechanical, unlike the SUVs. And on its roof, she glimpsed the faint glint of something metallic, equipment, sensors, or worse. Dr. Levin's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp with fear. They've called reinforcements. It's no longer a simple pursuit. They've coordinated. Sarah's stomach dropped. We're not just being chased. We're being hunted. The creatures stirred again, their glow intensifying, synchronized perfectly. Orion, the largest, emitted a high-pitched hum that vibrated through the van, startling Sarah and Daisy. The back doors of the SUVs rattled as if reacting to the creature's energy. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline and awe. These beings, once helpless and small, were now something extraordinary, something capable of defending themselves in ways that defied logic. But even as hope flickered, she knew it wouldn't be enough. The hunters were numerous, relentless, and methodical. Through the mist ahead, a narrow dirt path appeared, a risky detour, untested and treacherous. Sarah hesitated. One wrong move could mean disaster. Orion's glowing eyes met hers, and in that instant, she understood. The creatures were giving her a choice: trust them or turn back and risk capture. Her hands trembled over the wheel, heart pounding. The hum of engines behind them was growing louder. The night was thick with fog and tension. Sarah took a deep breath. She glanced at Dr. Levin, then at Daisy, then at the creatures. 15 tiny lives that had become the center of her universe. She made her decision, and with a sharp turn onto the dirt path, the chase intensified. Somewhere in the shadows, the hunters were gaining ground, but the creatures were ready, and Sarah realized with a sinking certainty that what awaited them at the end of this path would change everything. The dirt path shook under the van's tires, rocks bouncing and dust curling into the foggy night. Sarah's hands gripped the wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened, and Daisy's low growl vibrated through the van's floor. In the back, the creatures shifted, their glow pulsing in rhythm, synchronized as if communicating silently with each other and somehow with her. Sarah's chest tightened as she realized something she hadn't fully admitted yet. The creatures weren't just intelligent, they were strategic. Ahead, the trees parted slightly, revealing a small, abandoned cabin barely visible through the mist. Its windows were cracked, and the wooden boards that covered the door creaked in the wind. It was far from perfect, but it was isolated, hidden, and for the first time in hours, it offered a glimmer of hope. Here, Sarah whispered to Dr. Levin, this could be it. We can hide them here, at least for now. The creature stirred as if acknowledging the decision. Orion, the largest and most commanding of them, emitted a soft hum that resonated through the van. The sound was low, almost musical, but Sarah felt it deep in her chest, as if it carried meaning. The creatures were guiding her, showing her the way, and she followed instinctively. As they approached the cabin, a faint sense of unease settled over Sarah. The fog thickened, curling around the trees like ghostly fingers. But Daisy remained alert, sniffing the air, rolling softly, sensing danger that Sarah could only feel as a prickling on her skin. They parked the van behind the cabin, hidden partially by undergrowth and shadows. Sarah quickly helped Dr. Levin unload the creatures, one by one, wrapping them carefully in blankets as they moved with surprising coordination. Orion led the way, its glowing eyes scanning the perimeter as if it already knew the safest spots. "This feels alive," Sarah muttered, stepping into the cabin. The interior was dusty and cobwebbed, abandoned for years. But there was space enough to keep the creatures contained safely for a while. She set the blankets down on the wooden floorboards, letting them explore cautiously. The creatures spread out, moving with a grace and intelligence that was almost frightening. Their eyes shimmered, reflecting the dim moonlight that filtered through cracks in the cabin walls. They tested the boundaries of the room, communicating silently with subtle gestures, glances, and hums that seemed almost telepathic. Sarah couldn't help but feel a pang of awe and terror. "They're more than just alive," Dr. Levin whispered behind her. "They're aware of us, of the space. They're analyzing, strategizing. This is not normal." Sarah knelt beside Orion. Its glowing eyes met hers, and for a moment, she felt as if they were speaking, not in words, but in thought. A strange, unspoken understanding passed between them. "We are together, and we must survive." Outside, the forest was quiet, but the tension was palpable. Somewhere beyond the fog, engines hummed faintly, SUVs, patrols, hunters closing in. Sarah's stomach dropped. The creatures had hidden them, yes, but only temporarily. Whoever was following them would not give up easily. And then, the impossible happened. Orion stepped forward, glowing slightly brighter, and the other creatures formed a tight circle around it. The floorboards of the cabin vibrated faintly, and Sarah felt a strange resonance in her chest. Leaves outside rustled, birds quieted, and even the wind seemed to pause. The creatures were not just hiding, they were protecting. Daisy barked, low and urgent, and the glow of the creatures intensified. Sarah's hair stood on end as she realized something. The creature's power was not just intelligence. It was influence over the environment itself. Somehow, they were creating a protective barrier, subtle but undeniable. Dr. Levin's face was pale, awe and fear warring in his expression. "They're extraordinary. Whatever they are, they're capable of defending themselves. And us, maybe even against forces we can't see." Sarah nodded, swallowing hard. She glanced at the glowing beings, now moving in perfect synchrony. Each one seemed aware of every shadow, every sound, every potential threat. They were no longer just survivors, they were guardians. But then, a distant, mechanical hum broke the silence. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew steadily louder. Sarah's heart raced as she realized the SUVs hadn't given up, they were tracking them. Somehow, the creatures stiffened, heads tilting in unison toward the forest edge, glowing brighter in response. Orion stepped forward again, a low hum vibrating from its body, resonating through the wooden floorboards, and Sarah felt it like a warning. The hunters were close, too close. Sarah's chest tightened. "They're coming," she whispered, and in that moment, she understood the truth. The cabin was safe, for now, but the real test was about to begin. Whoever or whatever was coming would not be stopped easily. The creatures' glow pulsed in unison, a silent signal, and Sarah realized with a mix of fear and wonder that they were ready for what was coming. The forest beyond the cabin remained silent, waiting as the wind shifted. And then, from the shadows, movement, a dark figure emerging, stepping closer toward the cabin. Deliberate, unyielding. Sarah's hands trembled. Daisy growled, low and dangerous. The creatures, 15 tiny guardians, shimmered with eerie light. The hunters had found them, and the battle for survival was about to begin. The forest surrounding the cabin was thick with mist, every shadow twisting and shifting in the dim moonlight. Sarah's hand shook as she clutched Daisy's fur, her eyes darting between the approaching figure and the glowing creatures huddled behind her. The hunters had arrived, silent but deliberate, their movements precise. Their SUVs were parked a distance away, engines off, tires crunching on the damp forest floor as if to announce their presence. Orion, the largest of the creatures, stepped forward, its glow pulsating in a steady rhythm. The others mirrored it, forming a perfect circle around Sarah, Daisy, and the cabin's interior. A strange hum filled the air, vibrating through the floorboards, through Sarah's chest, resonating in every nerve. The creatures were ready. She could feel it, a protective force radiating outward, subtle but undeniable. The hunters advanced cautiously, weapons drawn, scanning the cabin for any sign of life. But as they stepped into the circle of glowing light, something impossible happened. The air seemed to shimmer, bending around the creatures. Leaves lifted gently from the ground, swirling in invisible currents, and the hunter's steps faltered as if invisible walls had risen in their path. What is this? One of them whispered, his voice tinged with panic. There, protecting themselves, Dr. Levin muttered, his eyes wide. Whatever these creatures are, they're not just intelligent, they're powerful. They can manipulate the environment. Sarah's breath caught. The creature's glow intensified, bright enough to cast the forest in a surreal, golden hue. Orion emitted a high-pitched, melodic hum, the sound weaving through the mist like a tangible force. The other creatures responded in perfect harmony, amplifying it. The hunters stumbled, shields raised, disoriented by the invisible pressure building around them. And then, as if reading the intruder's intentions, the creatures shifted. They moved with precision, small limbs kicking up the dirt, glowing eyes fixed on the humans. The forest seemed alive, the wind bending, leaves swirling, shadows elongating, all under the creature's influence. It was mesmerizing, terrifying. Sarah's heart raced. There, controlling everything, she whispered, awe-stricken. They're defending us. Daisy growled low in her throat, moving protectively at her feet. The creature's synchronized hum reached a crescendo, vibrating through the cabin and into Sarah's bones. The hunter's panic was palpable. One of them dropped his weapon, stumbling backward, eyes wide with disbelief. Then, Orion raised its tiny, but commanding head, and in an instant, the air between the hunters and the cabin shimmered violently like a ripple through water. The hunters froze, unable to move as if an invisible force held them in place. Trees swayed violently, branches bending without wind. The forest responded to the creature's collective will. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she watched. These beings, once innocent puppies, were now guardians, forces beyond comprehension. Protecting her, protecting life itself. You're amazing, she whispered to them, voice choked with emotion. The hunters struggled, yelling orders, but their movements were sluggish, unnatural, as if reality itself resisted them. Orion's glow pulsed faster, brighter, sending ripples outward that pushed the intruders back. One by one, they stumbled, retreating toward their SUVs, their plans unraveling under the creature's control. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and awe. She knew they had won for now, but the intensity of the creature's power left her breathless. They were not just alive. They were conscious, strategic, and capable of defending life itself in ways humans could not understand. Dr. Levin placed a hand on her shoulder, voice trembling. Sarah, they're protecting us, and maybe something bigger than us. They're extraordinary. We've witnessed something no one else ever will. Sarah hugged Daisy tightly, tears streaming down her face. She looked at the glowing beings, 15 small yet extraordinary creatures, who had transformed from helpless puppies into forces beyond imagination. They blinked at her with intelligence, awareness, and trust. And then, one by one, they began to settle. The glow softened, fading to a gentle shimmer, the hum dying down, as if the world had exhaled in relief. Orion approached Sarah, nuzzling her hand, tiny claws brushing gently against her palm. Sarah whispered, almost in disbelief, "You're safe." For now, outside, the forest remained eerily quiet. The hunters' vehicles had retreated, leaving only the wind and the rustle of trees in their wake. Sarah knew the threat was not gone, it would return, and the world would eventually discover the truth, but for this night, they had survived. She knelt on the cabin floor, surrounded by glowing creatures, Daisy at her side. The bond she felt with them was indescribable, a mixture of fear, awe, and love that transcended logic. She realized that life would never be the same. These beings were not just extraordinary, they were family, guardians, and mysteries the world wasn't ready for. As dawn broke over the misty forest, the first light filtered through the cabin windows. The creature's glow faded, blending with the pale sunlight. And for the first time since the stormy night began, Sarah allowed herself a deep, shuddering breath. Somewhere beyond the trees, danger still lurked. But for now, she and her extraordinary companions were together, alive and free. And deep in her heart, Sarah knew, whatever came next, they would face it as one. The forest was silent, but alive. The creatures had changed everything, and their story had only just begun.